I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, holding my breath as I knocked a second time. The paint on the door had faded to a dull gray, but I could still see the tiny heart I'd carved into the trim with a hairpin when I was 9. It was still there. I wasn't. The doorknob turned, and for a brief second I expected her face. My mother's short auburn hair, her square shoulders, her impatient expression that always softened when she saw me. But the man who answered was younger, maybe mid-30s, wearing a faded sweatshirt and work boots with a confused expression like I was selling something he didn't want. "Yes," he said. I hesitated, gripping the strap of my purse. "I'm looking for my mother. This is her house, Margaret Weller." He blinked, then stepped back slightly, as if I'd said something that didn't quite compute. "I bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From her. She was the previous owner, yeah, but she moved out." I stared at him, trying to anchor myself in his words. Bought. Moved. My mouth went dry. "She didn't tell me she was selling." He scratched his neck. "I'm sorry, I just assumed. She said she didn't have any kids." The words landed like a slap. I felt them inside my chest, sharp and mean. She said she didn't have any kids. Not a daughter? Not a granddaughter? No one. I wanted to believe he misunderstood. Maybe she said she didn't live with any kids. But I knew my mother. She was specific, exact. If she said it, she meant it. I asked if I could see the house, just for a minute, just to see if she left anything behind. The man hesitated, then said, "There's nothing here that belonged to her anymore." He closed the door, not cruelly, but with finality. I didn't knock again. I sat in my car parked under the tree we planted when my father died. I remember digging the hole with her that summer, both of us sweating, both trying to make something grow after so much loss. That tree had grown taller than the house now. I stared at the porch, at the new curtain in the window, at the absence of her car in the driveway. The mailbox was different. So was the front lock. So was everything. I didn't cry. Not then. Shock is its own kind of silence. I just sat there letting the truth settle in like bad weather. My mother had sold the house, given it to a stranger, left no note, no warning, and worst of all, she never even said goodbye. 10 years earlier, I returned to that same house under very different circumstances. My husband had just left me for a woman he met at work, a paralegal named Tracy, who wore red lipstick and laughed like she never had to worry about bills or broken appliances. I found out about them on a Tuesday through a receipt for a weekend getaway tucked into his glove compartment. By Friday, he was gone. By Sunday, I was on my mother's doorstep with a 4-year-old on my hip, a suitcase in my hand, and shame in every breath I took. She didn't say much when she opened the door. She just stepped aside and said, "Well, you're home, I guess." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. That was my mother's way. Nothing was ever declared, only implied. That night, I made up the old daybed in the back room, the one that used to be a sewing space. My daughter Mia slept in my arms, her breath soft against my collarbone, while I stared at the ceiling fan and wondered how I'd manage to become a woman with no home, no job, and no plan. But my mother let us stay. She always said it was temporary, but the temporary turned permanent the way weeds creep across pavement. I got a part-time job at the library downtown, then another one waitressing weekends. I paid for groceries, for internet, for property taxes when she forgot to mail the check. When she had gallbladder surgery, I took 2 weeks off and bathed her myself. I learned the hard way that even the strongest people become fragile in fluorescent hospital rooms. And every year on her birthday, I made her blueberry pancakes and wrote her a card. The words changed each year, but the message stayed the same. Thank you. I love you. I wouldn't be standing if it weren't for you. I believed deep down, maybe naively, that care had a memory. That loyalty meant something. That time and tenderness given consistently would wrap around a person and be returned in kind. I thought she saw me, that she knew me. I believed we were building something together again, even if the bricks looked different now. There were moments that confirmed that hope. She'd call me her rock when her friends visited. I don't know what I'd do without her, she'd say, and it would light something warm in me, even if she never said it to my face. Once she handed me her favorite necklace and told me she wanted me to have it when the time comes. I wore it to job interviews after that like armor. I thought I was earning something. Maybe not money, maybe not praise, but a place. A place in her future. A place in her plans. A place in her heart that was secure. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have guessed, was that while I was building a life around her, she was building an escape from me. The first sign was the mail. It started going missing. Not all of it, just the important pieces. The tax statements, the home insurance renewal, the letters from Social Security, things I usually kept track of. For years, she'd left that pile on the kitchen counter for me to sort through, and she'd trust me to flag what mattered. But one day, it was empty. When I asked, she shrugged and said, "Oh, I took care of it." That was new. She never took care of it. She always handed it off. Then there were the phone calls. Long, hushed ones, always after dinner. She'd wander into the laundry room with her cell, speaking in a low voice I barely recognized. When I asked who it was, she gave answers that didn't stick, old friend, or just someone from church, even though she hadn't set foot in a church in years. When I walked past the cracked door, once I heard her say, "No, she doesn't know. I'm handling it." That was me. I didn't say anything right then, just kept walking. The house got quieter in strange ways. She stopped turning on the classical music station in the mornings, which she'd listened to faithfully since my father passed. She stopped setting the table for 3 even when Mia was staying over. She used to pour 2 cups of tea out of habit. Now, there was always just one. And when I'd sit down beside her, the smell of hers would already be cold. She changed how she spoke to Mia, too. There was more distance, more instructiveness. She told her to focus on independence, to not rely too much on others. Once, when Mia spilled juice and looked to me for help, my mother said quietly, "Better to teach her to clean it herself. She's not a baby." It felt like I was being erased in real time, one small moment at a time. Not with cruelty. That's what made it worse. It was with distance, with careful omission. 1,000 tiny absences. I remember one Sunday night I made her favorite stew. I'd found the parsnips on sale and made a point to caramelize them the way she liked. The smell filled the house onions times slow-cooked beef. I set the table, lit a candle, even put her old vinyl on in the background. She came out of her room, stood in the doorway, looked at the food, and said I already ate. Then she walked away. No anger, no thank you, no explanation, just nothing. I sat there and ate alone. I didn't even light the candle after that. That was the first night I let myself wonder, what if she didn't want me here anymore? What if all this time she was just tolerating me? What if I'd mistaken proximity for love? But then I'd find her watching old movies with the volume too low, and I'd bring her a blanket, and she'd smile at me like we were still the same, like none of it was shifting. like the ground wasn't giving out beneath my feet. Denial is powerful. You tell yourself stories. You rewrite the scene in your mind. You say she's just tired. She's just going through something. You remember the time she called you her rock? You pretend they still count. But the silence got louder, and I couldn't unhear what she hadn't said. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I found the brochure. Mia was at school. My mother had gone out. She said she was getting her hair done, but I knew she hadn't had it cut in months. I was vacuuming under the couch cushions, where she always dropped crumbs and receipts and loose change. There, it was folded, dog-eared, and partly hidden beneath the lining. Liberty Trust Property Solutions. At first glance, it looked like junk mail. Bold blue letters promising stress-free property transfers, and beneath it, cash offers. No inspections, no realtors, no hassle. I was about to toss it when I noticed the writing on the back. My mother's handwriting. Sharp, angular, the same way she used to sign my school field trip slips. She'd written, "Call Aaron. No heirs. No contest. No heirs." I sat down on the edge of the couch, still holding the brochure. My ears rang. My skin flushed hot, then cold. I read the words again, slowly hoping they might rearrange into something less cruel. But they didn't. She hadn't just contacted someone about selling. She'd already made peace with erasing me from the process. No heirs. That was deliberate. That wasn't oversight. That was rejection made permanent. I should have asked her right then. Waited until she got home and held it up like a mirror. But I didn't. Instead, I waited until the next morning when she left her laptop open at the kitchen table. The screen had gone black, but the email app was still running. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. And there it was. The thread was long, stretching back months. Her exchange with someone named Aaron M. He wrote like a salesman, warm, smooth, transactional. She responded with efficiency. They had already agreed on a cash offer. No listing, no showings. A discreet transaction, he called it. She called it relief. In one message, he confirmed all paperwork has been submitted. You'll receive your check upon vacancy. The buyer understands there are no occupants to evict. That line hit me like a freight train. No occupants. I was sitting in the house, sleeping in it, cooking in it, paying the damn electric bill, and to this man, to this arrangement, I was invisible. I didn't exist. I couldn't breathe for a moment. She had planned the whole thing. She wasn't just selling. She was disappearing. She had rewritten her life in a version where I was already gone. I confronted the papers next. A folder hidden inside her closet under her old winter coats. Not locked, just tucked away. Like she wasn't afraid I'd find it, or like she didn't care if I did. Inside, a signed deed transfer. A notarized affidavit stating she had no dependents. A moving checklist. A typed itinerary for a flight to Santa Barbara. That was when I realized she wasn't planning to tell me. Not even after it was done. She would have let me come home one day to a locked door, an empty driveway, a silence so thick it would have taken years to pull out of my lungs. I sat on her bed. That goddamn floral quilt she loved so much still smelled like lavender. And all I could think was, she made this choice with a clear head, not out of confusion, not out of illness, but with intention. And that made it so much worse. Because now, I didn't just have to live with the fact that I was being left behind. I had to live with the fact that it made her feel relieved. It took me 2 days to find her. The email thread had mentioned a forwarding address for her final utility cancellation. It was a coastal hotel, the Windmere Inn, 3 hours south, tucked between a marina and a retirement golf course. I called once. No answer. I called again and asked if Margaret Weller was staying there. The woman at the front desk confirmed it without hesitation. She's here. Want me to ring her room? No, I said. I'll come. The drive was quiet. Mia was with her father for the weekend, and for once I didn't fight him on it. I didn't even tell him what was happening. I didn't want advice. I didn't want permission to feel what I was already drowning in. The Windmere Inn looked like it had been nice in the 90s, yellow stucco walls, sun-bleached railings, and an ocean breeze that felt like it belonged to someone richer than me. I spotted her on the back patio near the pool, sitting alone with a cup of something dark and steaming her sunglasses on her posture upright as always. She saw me before I spoke. She didn't flinch, just set her cup down and waited. I walked slowly, not because I wanted to, because I had to. My legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. When I reached her, I stopped a few feet away. Why she looked up at me, face unreadable. I knew you'd find me. You didn't say goodbye. I didn't want a scene. I sat down, not asking for permission. The metal chair scraped loudly against the tile. You sold the house. She nodded. You lied. No, she said evenly. I didn't tell you. That's not the same. That sentence, that awful detached logic. It hit harder than shouting ever could. I could have screamed, demanded answers, begged, but I didn't. I just breathed deep and slow until the next question came out like ash. Was it that easy to erase me? She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry, clear. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I felt myself shake. You told them you had no heirs. She looked past me toward the water. You're not a child. You're a woman with your own life. You stayed in that house too long. It wasn't helping either of us. I laughed short, bitter. So you sold the roof over my head, erased me from every document, didn't even leave a key. You built your life around me, she said like I was some fixed star. But I was sinking, and I didn't ask you to stay. You decided to be my caretaker, and I let you. That was my mistake. I wanted to slap her. I wanted to run. But I didn't do either. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph. The one of us in the hospital room the day Mia was born. I'd kept it in my wallet for years, soft around the corners. My mother was smiling in that photo. Beaming, actually. Holding Mia like she had waited her whole life to meet her. I held it out to her. You loved me once. She looked down at it. For a second, I saw her throat twitch like she had to swallow something sharp. Then she said, I still do, but I need it out. I nodded once. That was all. I didn't fight anymore. I didn't have to. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking, but I forced them still. You'll remember me, I said quietly, even if you choose to forget. She didn't follow me. She didn't call my name. She just sat there staring at the ocean like it owed her something. I didn't look back. That's the last time I saw her. 3 weeks after that day at the inn, I drove past the house one last time. The man who lived there now had painted the door blue. There were new wind chimes hanging under the porch awning. The tree in the yard, the one we planted for my father, had been trimmed down. It looked strange, thinner, exposed, like someone had decided it needed to be reshaped into something unrecognizable. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The house was no longer mine. It hadn't been for a long time. I just hadn't known it. I moved into a small duplex on the east side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. 2 bedrooms, old hardwood floors, a leaky faucet in the kitchen that I fixed myself with a borrowed wrench. The first night I slept there, I cried without understanding why. I cried because the silence was mine, because no one would be knocking on my door asking for painkillers or fresh towels, because I could leave a dish in the sink and it wouldn't be met with passive judgment. I could finally breathe, and I hated that the breathing felt good. That was the part I didn't expect, the quiet relief that came after the abandonment. It didn't replace the hurt, but it softened it, like aloe on a burn. I was alone, but I wasn't beholden. I planted flowers in the backyard. The same perennials my mother once grew in the front beds, peonies, foxglove, black-eyed Susans. I planted them not as a tribute, but as a reclamation. They were mine now. I watered them at dusk when the world went still, and Mia would help me barefoot in the grass, asking which ones would bloom first. She didn't ask much about her grandmother. I didn't bring it up. Kids are smart. She knew something had happened. She saw my face when I packed the boxes. She watched me throw away the old birthday cards and donate the ceramic angel collection. She asked once, "Is Grandma okay?" And I said, "I don't know." That was the honest truth. What surprised me most was how little she pushed, as if she instinctively understood what I was only beginning to accept. Some people don't explain themselves. Some absences are never filled. Some mothers leave in other ways long before the front door closes. I used the money I'd been saving for her property tax money I'd once set aside for her care to replace the stove in the new place. Then I bought Mia a proper desk. She wrote her school essays there. She drew silly comics with talking cats and princesses who rescued themselves. I framed one of them and hung it by the door. Every Sunday, we made pancakes. I kept the blueberries stocked in the freezer just like I used to. Sometimes I'd reach for her recipe card, the one with faded ink and flour smudges, and then I'd stop. I knew it by heart now. I didn't need the paper. Some nights I'd find myself thinking about her, wondering what hotel she'd move to next, if she was still near the ocean, if she ever looked at that photo I gave her. I never called, never wrote. She didn't either. There was no reconciliation, no dramatic apology, no moment where everything made sense. But I didn't need it anymore, because slowly in my own way, I reclaimed the space she left behind. I filled it with things that didn't ask me to disappear. And the woman I became, she's quieter, clearer, less afraid of being left. Because once it happens like that, once the person who raised you chooses a stranger over goodbye, you learn something important. You learn that survival isn't a miracle, it's a decision. One you make every single day. I didn't hear from her on my birthday. That was the first year in my entire life, 39 of them, without a card or a call. Even when we were barely speaking, she'd manage something. A stiff voicemail, a $10 check, a note scribbled on a recycled envelope with "Don't waste it on candles." I used to laugh. Now I sat at my small kitchen table, Mia already asleep, a half-eaten piece of cake in front of me, and stared at the phone that never lit up. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Grief isn't clean. It doesn't arrive like a storm and leave you scrubbed and new. It's sediment. It settles in strange corners of your body, between your ribs, behind your eyes, in the backs of your knees. That night, I felt it settle in again, heavier than I'd let it be in months. It wasn't just the absence of her voice, it was the silence that grew in its place. The finality of it. Like she'd decided my birth no longer counted. I didn't cry that night. I just stared at the cake and thought about the first birthday I remembered her celebrating for me, 7 years old, a butterfly piñata in the backyard, and her hands covered in frosting as she tried to fix a collapsing homemade cake. She wasn't a warm woman, but she tried. That version of her, the one who tried, I think I've mourned her the most. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I sat on my porch, the wind catching the edge of the envelope, and opened it with hands I didn't know were shaking. It was 2 lines. Don't look for me. This was my choice. You were never the reason I left. I read it again, and again, and again. There was no explanation, no apology, just finality. She didn't want to be found. She didn't want questions. She didn't want me. But still, you were never the reason I left. I didn't know what to do with that. It was supposed to feel like comfort, I think. It didn't. Because it left the rest of the weight unclaimed. If I wasn't the reason, then I had no control. I was collateral. A loose end she cut cleanly without ceremony. I kept the letter. Not out of sentiment, out of proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the abandonment, that it had shape, ink, intention. It went into a box with the rest of her things I wasn't ready to throw away, but couldn't bear to look at. The pressed flower from my first dance corsage, her favorite thimble, a blurry Polaroid from a lake trip where we both looked sunburned and tired, but smiling. I put the box in the back of my closet and told myself I'd sort it eventually. Months passed. Life like it always does resumed. Mia grew taller, sassier. She started playing piano, something her grandmother always meant to do, but never learned. I took more hours at work. I joined a book club. I dated half-heartedly. Nothing stuck. And then one spring afternoon, Mia came home from school with a drawing. It was a house, a small one with wildflowers spilling from the garden. There were 2 people inside, drawn in pink crayon, a mother and daughter sitting at a table, hands touching. Above the house, in her careful block letters, she had written, "We stay." I stared at it for a long time. My throat tightened. We stay. Not run, not vanish, not erase. We stay. I hung that drawing on the fridge. Centered. Unframed. It reminded me every day that some legacies don't have to be inherited. Some can be rewritten. I saw her once after that. Not face to face. Just from across a parking lot. I had taken Mia to a weekend flea market outside Santa Rosa. We were picking through vintage scarves and dusty paperbacks when I saw a woman stepping out of a silver rental car wearing dark sunglasses and a blue linen dress I recognized from years ago. Her walk was unmistakable, shoulders pulled tight, small, purposeful strides, like she was always 10 minutes late to something important. She was thinner, paler. She held her bag close to her ribs like it might fall apart if she let it go. I didn't call out. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't speak. I just stood there, clutching a cracked copy of Little Women, watching her move across the asphalt toward the vendors. She didn't look around. She didn't pause. She didn't see me. And I think I'm not sure, but I think she knew I was there. That kind of silence between people doesn't come from absence. It comes from decision. And she had made hers. I respected it in the same way you respect fire, not because it's right, but because it burns if you get too close. Mia tugged my hand, asking if she could get ice cream. I nodded. I let her pull me in the opposite direction, even though I could feel my mother getting smaller behind me. That night, I didn't tell Mia I'd seen her. There was nothing to be gained, no lesson, no moral. Just an ache I already knew too well, rising up like a bruise being touched. Some people don't come back. Some leave not because they're angry or sick or lost, but because they choose to. Because something in them detaches and doesn't want to be fastened again. The strangest thing was I didn't feel rage, Not anymore. I'd felt it for so long that when it finally drained out of me, what remained was quieter, sadder, not a wound, a scar. I started seeing a therapist that spring. I hadn't planned to. A friend from the book club suggested it casually over coffee. I brushed it off. But then one night, when Mia asked if her grandma had liked tulips, I felt something collapse inside me. I couldn't answer. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about the unanswered questions that keep echoing in the quiet. So I went. I sat in that small room with the soft gray couch and the gentle woman named Dana, and I told her about the house, the sale, the stranger at the door. I told her about the picture I gave my mother and the letter I kept in the closet. I told her about feeling invisible in a place where I used to be needed. And Dana said something I'll never forget. She said being needed isn't the same as being loved, and being loved isn't always enough to keep someone from leaving. I sat with that for a long time. It changed something in me, because I had confused the two for years. I had given everything time, money, care, patience because I thought it would protect me. I believed love was a contract, and if I fulfilled my side, I'd be safe. But contracts break, and people disappear. And love isn't a wall, it's a door. Sometimes it opens outward. That summer, I bought myself a birthday gift for the first time in my life. A small sapphire ring. Simple, nothing dramatic. But I chose it. For me. I wore it on my right hand, and every time I looked at it, I remembered I was still here. Still choosing. Still building a life, even in the ruins of one I never got to finish. That fall, Mia asked if we could visit the neighborhood where she grew up. Not the house, just the streets around it. She said she missed the sidewalks, the park, with the crooked swing, the tiny convenience store, where the owner gave her peppermints wrapped in red cellophane. She remembered more than I thought she would. I told her we could go. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to say no either. So one Saturday, we drove the 15 minutes across town through streets that felt like old photographs, familiar but distant. The trees had turned brittle and gold lining the sidewalks like paper lanterns. Everything looked smaller. The hills, the stop signs, even the sky. We parked near the elementary school. Mia skipped ahead while I stood on the corner where I used to wait for her in the afternoon's coffee, in hand exhaustion tucked beneath my eyes. I remembered the way my mother used to wave from the porch as we walked up the driveway, sometimes smiling, sometimes already inside by the time we reached the steps. We didn't walk past the house. I saw it from a block away behind a hedge that hadn't been there when we lived there. The man who bought it had put up new shutters, painted them forest green. There were wind chimes hanging from the porch beam, different ones now, metal instead of glass. The garden beds were gone, just mulch now, flat, sterile. I couldn't look for long. Instead, we walked to the park. Mia ran ahead, threw herself onto the crooked swing like no time had passed. I sat on the bench where I used to read library books while she played. The same graffiti was carved into the armrest, JT plus Erica, forever. Someone had drawn a crude heart next to it, now faded from weather. A woman sat down at the other end of the bench, maybe a decade older than me. She had the kind of face that looked like it had held a lot of tears over the years. She glanced at me, then at Mia. "She yours?" she asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "She looks happy." I nodded. The woman stood up after a few minutes and walked toward the far side of the park, leaving me alone. I watched Mia pump her legs higher and higher on the swing until the chains creaked with the strain. Her hair whipped across her face, and for a split second, I saw myself at that age, barefoot, full of questions, looking for something I didn't yet have words for. When we left the park, she held my hand the whole way back to the car. We didn't say much. She didn't ask why I hadn't taken her to the house. I think she understood. Back at home, we cooked dinner together, spaghetti and garlic bread. We played Nina Simone on the kitchen speaker. Mia danced with the wooden spoon like she was auditioning for a Broadway show. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that feels like it starts somewhere beneath the ribs. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the old tin box I kept tucked away in the cabinet. Inside, the letter still sat folded and neat, untouched since the day I read it. I pulled it out, held it in my hands for a long moment, and then finally I let it go. I burned it in the sink. It curled in on its self-edges, blackening flame, licking up the corners of her handwriting until the words were ash. Not out of anger, not even out of pain, but because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need proof that she'd left. I had the garden, the keys to a door no one could lock behind me, a daughter who danced in the kitchen and called this place home. And that was enough. Winter came early that year. The cold settled in like it had somewhere to be. I wrapped the windows in plastic and doubled up the quilts on Mia's bed. She didn't mind. She said it made her feel like we were camping. The holidays were quiet. Mia spent Thanksgiving with her father's family, and I spent it with a borrowed novel and a slice of pumpkin pie from the grocery store bakery. I didn't put up decorations that year. I didn't have it in me. But on Christmas Eve, Mia surprised me. She'd made a wreath from pine cones and red ribbon. It was crooked and falling apart at the edges, but she held it up proudly. "It's for the front door," she said, "so people know there's love inside." That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the living room staring at that wreath. Her words echoed. So people know there's love inside. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. I didn't need a big house, or validation, or a mother's presence to prove I had worth. I had built something here. Not flashy, not perfect, but real, solid, quietly beautiful. One night in January, I found a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, but something made me listen. It was Aaron, the man from the house sale. His voice was low, apologetic. He said he didn't know what had happened between us, me and my mother, but he thought I should know she'd passed away. Complications from pneumonia. Alone in a long-term stay hotel outside Palm Springs. He gave no details. Just said my name had been listed on an emergency contact form, but with no address. He'd only found me through an old envelope in her things. She didn't leave a will, he added quietly, but she left a note. I hung up before he could offer to send anything. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, knees pulled to my chest, and waited for grief to hit like a wave, but it didn't. What came was quieter, a kind of stillness I didn't know I needed. I didn't cry for her. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who believed love was earned by holding on tighter, the one who begged silently for her place in a heart that had already let go. That night, I told Mia. I kept it simple. She asked, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I think I'm finally getting there." A week later, a package arrived. No return label. Inside a small wooden box, hand-carved, the kind my mother used to buy from craft fairs. It held two things. One was a photograph, the same one I'd given her that day on the patio, me, her, and Mia in the hospital room years ago. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "I kept this. I tried." The other was a necklace. Her favorite. Silver chain, small opal pendant. I stared at it for a long time. The metal was warm, like it had just left her skin. I didn't wear it, but I didn't hide it either. I hung it on the corner of Mia's mirror, not as a tribute, as a reminder that people are complicated, that love doesn't always show up in the ways we need, and that sometimes surviving someone is the closest thing to forgiveness we'll ever get. Spring arrived late, like someone hesitant to enter a room where something hard had just happened. The trees were slow to bloom, and the air still held winter's breath in the early hours. But it came anyway, quiet and green and soft at the edges. Mia asked to plant a vegetable garden. I wanted to say no. I was tired, and the ground in the backyard was stubborn, full of old clay and broken roots. But I looked at her 10 years old, covered in freckles, already taller than she was last fall, and I said yes. We turned the soil together with a rusted shovel. She chose tomatoes and carrots. I added rosemary and mint. Every weekend we knelt in the dirt side by side, digging, patting, watering, waiting. I found peace there, not the kind that arrives with certainty, the kind that sneaks up on you in the rhythm of ordinary things. One morning, I woke up before Mia. The house was quiet. Light poured in through the kitchen window in that watery golden way it only does in April. I brewed coffee and stood barefoot on the porch, breathing in the cold morning air. And for a few minutes, I felt okay. Not healed, not whole, but okay. I watched a robin tug at the garden mulch. I sipped coffee slowly. I didn't think about the past or the house or the photograph I'd packed away in the drawer beside the scissors and batteries. I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd chosen. Later that day, I opened the old tin box again. I expected to feel the same familiar ache, but something had shifted. The grief was still there, coiled and quiet, but it didn't own me anymore. I pulled out the ceramic thimble from the bottom, the one she always kept on her sewing table. It had a tiny painted lighthouse on it, chipped at the base. I held it in my palm and felt something like mercy, not forgiveness, just mercy. There's a difference. Forgiveness is a decision. Mercy is a release. I stood at the kitchen sink, turned the thimble over once more, and then set it down gently beside the windowsill herbs. I didn't need her to come back. I didn't need her to fix anything. I had survived the leaving. I had survived the silence. I had survived being invisible. And still, I was here, breathing, rooting, blooming. The final time I drove past the old house, it was late summer. Mia had fallen asleep in the back seat, her cheek pressed against the car window, a book still open in her lap. We'd spent the day at the lake, and the smell of sunscreen and damp towels still lingered in the air. I hadn't meant to drive that way. My hands just took the turn, out of habit, or something quieter than habit unfinishedness maybe. The street looked the same, but smaller somehow. The pavement had cracked in the same places. The corner mailbox leaned a little more, but the wind felt like it always had there, slow and soft, moving through the trees, like it remembered everyone who'd ever walked under them. I stopped the car across the street from the house. It was painted a different color now, soft yellow with white shutters. Someone had planted rose bushes where the foxglove used to be. The porch had been redone. The railings looked newer. The wind chimes were gone. In the window, I saw a shadow move, someone pacing, maybe on the phone. A life unfolding in a space that used to hold mine. I felt no jealousy, no envy, just distance, just the slow ache of something that had once mattered deeply and now didn't, not like that. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. I sat for a few minutes, watching the breeze lift the edges of the roses. The sky had begun to change, that blue-gold stretch of late afternoon light falling across the sidewalk like spilled paint. Mia stirred in the back seat. "Where are we just driving?" I whispered. She turned and looked out the window at the house. Her voice was groggy. "Is that your old place?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. She turned back around, nestled her head against the seat, and fell asleep again. I sat there for a few more breaths. Then I turned the key, pulled away slowly, and didn't look back. There was nothing left in that house for me. No ghosts, no pieces of myself. I had gathered what I needed and planted it elsewhere. In Mia's laugh. In the garden, we watered every Sunday. In the quiet mornings, when I no longer checked the mailbox for a letter that would never come. Some losses become part of the architecture of who you are. You don't rebuild around them. You build with them. Stronger. Different. Yours. I don't think she meant to hurt me the way she did. I don't think she knew how deep the roots went, how many years I had wrapped my identity around her approval, her presence, her small, hard-earned affections. But maybe that's the part she understood better than I did. She needed to unspool from all of it. And in her leaving, I had to do the same. Some nights I still hear her voice in my head, sharp, certain, impossibly distant. But it doesn't undo me anymore. It flickers like a match, then fades. And what's left after that is mine, this life, this home, this daughter who watches me like I'm a constant she can believe in. I stopped needing the apology. I stopped needing the why. What I needed was the room to become someone else. Someone better. Not for her. For me. Whatever darkness had come before this present moment held its own luminous possibility, and that finally was enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if this story moved you. Share your voice. It matters.